Well, before you say anything critical about the city of Toronto, I always say you have to start with a compliment because it is a good city. We're considered one of the most livable cities in the world. And we try hard and mean to do well. And so that's a good place to start from. However, there's some things that are not well understood and some things that are not well financed. And that's the problem, I would say. The main thing that I think is not understood about resilience is we all think about it as, do I as an individual have resilience in my insides? If somebody knocks me down and I'm on the mat, can I pick myself up and, I don't know, get knocked down again? Or can I pick myself up and carry on? And that is a big part of it, and it relates to food too. People have to know how to cook. They have to know how to cook with a minimum of aids, like there might be an electrical blackout or any number of things that mean that ordinary things aren't functioning. Can you still feed yourself? So there is obviously an individual side to it, but more profoundly there is a community side. Like if I don't know how to cook, that's not just my fault or my parents' fault. They eliminated that from the school system. When I went to school, you had to learn it. Women learned home economics and boys learned girls learned home economics and boys learned manual training. So we learned those things, but the school system in its wisdom decided, no, we don't need life skills in the school. So these are community losses and they're community assets we have to rebuild. So I think that's what the city needs to look at. And I would say one of the major things that the city needs to do to prepare itself for the community assets that need to be built is they need to realize that when we talk about emergency, we're not just talking about the shock that all of a sudden there's a flood, a tornado, a blackout, a heat wave. There are also stresses. And if an individual or a community is stressed, they have a very hard time responding well to a shock. They're likely to either break down or break out. And so the stresses in a society are things such as inequality, racism, inability of groups to get along well, lack of cooperation between the city government and people, lack of connection of institutions. All of these are stressors, and this is what the city has to work on dealing with. And you know what? Whether or not we have an emergency, it's going to be good that we build those things up. And if we do have an emergency, it'll save our butts. Okay? Most of us think about food, we think about it either from the point of view of our individual needs or maybe our family needs. And we even talk about family farms and family meals. Those are common terms, and they're very relevant, although the family meal is quickly disappearing, as is the family farm. But the fact is we also cook and produce food as a community, whether we know it or not, but certainly in some things we know it. And here at Scadding Court, you have a whole variety of people who are working together in one garden, and that allows a number of things to happen. One is you got a wide range of foods, some from different cultures, some from people with different specialties in growing, and some with different tastes in the food they like. So when you grow as a community, there's lots more to share. And it's a bigger pie you've cooked, and we can have more people sharing it and more people baking it. And the other thing is, you can do things that an individual can't afford to do. So if you look around Scadding Court, you'll see they've got greenhouses and a variety of things like that. They've got aquaponics that no individual could afford or would know how to build, but as a community, we can find the skills and resources to do it. And so we need to get beyond just family farm production and family consumption into community things. So maybe if there's an emergency, we might all have to land up here at the kitchen right here at Scadding Court. We'll cook dinner together and we'll eat it around this large table, including people we don't know, but we'll be pretty happy we met them, as a matter of fact. So it's the community nature of food we need to really rediscover. We've lost it a little bit. There was a time when everyone had community baking ovens and all sorts of parts of food were community related. We'd all walk down to the river together to get water to bring back, and most of those have disappeared, but we need to reestablish the community conviviality to have a really good food system.
Basic human rights involve housing, water, clean water, healthy food, decent livelihoods. So you have to have a functioning environment, a functioning society, a functioning city in order to have the basic human rights met. And when climate chaos, as I like to call it, because it's not a gradual change, it's very chaotic. When we're dealing with climate chaos, many of the things that we need to survive and thrive are at risk, whether it's our food crops, whether it's flooded houses, as we've been seeing all over the world. Climate chaos has a very direct effect on basic human rights. It also has a direct effect on what people do to work, because we're going to have to start doing different kinds of work if we're going to be able to evolve and innovate as a society in order to adapt to climate change. So if we are going to have human rights and climate change, we have to become a lot more creative and a lot more smart about how we protect human rights as we figure out how to adapt. Because otherwise we could just leave a little group of elite people stay safe in their bubble and everybody else is toast. It's not a good idea. We're going to be resilient to climate chaos. It's really, really important we pay attention to our food. Access to healthy food, having food reserves. For instance, when people are displaced, as recently happened in my community with a building fire, a lot of those people have been unable to get the kind of food that they need. Perhaps they have diabetes and things like that. Getting gift cards to Tim Hortons doesn't help with their diet. So we have to get a lot smarter as a society about how we address food. It should no longer be a commodity, it should be a human right. And when we see it as a human right, we make sure that those who grow and produce our food have decent livelihoods. We make sure that those who cook and feed us our food have human rights. We also make sure that the food we're eating is good for us and it's not contaminated with many, many things that our current food system is contaminated with. So climate chaos affects food in every single way and at every level. Just to give a little example, Ontario has recently lost an entire year of apple crop. We've lost most of our corn crop. Just a little shift in the weather and our seasons change and entire crops are gone. And then we have to import them. But the places that we're importing from are becoming desertified and drought-stricken. So we can't just count on being able to get food from other people anymore because they're running out of food as well. We know that most of the globe will not be able to grow food within the next 10 years. And in that case, we really need to do a lot of work to make ourselves food secure. Right now, a city has 3-day supply of food, and in the wintertime, we import 80% of our food. And as I said, where are we going to import from? And how are we going to maintain and grow enough food for ourselves when we can't predict what's happening with our seasons? There's an awful lot of work to be done around food security. So our current food system is very, very insecure. For one thing, our major food terminal, through which all food is circulated throughout the GTA, even Ontario, is in a floodplain. That's a problem. We've been getting some really, really heavy flooding, and it's just a matter of time before our food terminal is submerged during a crisis. That's a huge problem. And then where the food is grown and where it's coming from, is continually at risk. We're seeing many, many, many examples of our food sources being affected by climate change. So, and then even just transporting it and getting it to us back and forth. Our average food item travels 3,000 miles. This doesn't make sense. It's not sustainable. And climate chaos can do a lot of damage to that as well. As the storms get bigger and bigger, there's going to be more and more interruptions to international flights, international shipping, everything else. So we have to become much more locally food secure, and we haven't actually done anything about any of it. There's absolutely no measures being taken, and if you talk to the federal government or the provincial government, the ministries of agriculture, they do not address climate change adaptation or mitigation. All they're looking at is export and how to maximize export and profit, and they're leaving all the farmers that are trying to learn how to adapt high and dry. They leave them with nothing. And we need to understand that only 2% of our population are farmers, and most of those are struggling and in debt. And we have a terrible, terrible, terrible situation when it comes to those who actually grow our food. These people need a basic income. They need to be given the resources to be able to adapt to climate change. And having our farmers in debt, struggling and unable to adapt is pretty much the stupidest thing we could do right now.
What food resiliency means to me, I think what we're talking about is our ability to ensure that our families and community members are well fed, and in that I mean in terms of having enough food and nutritious food that's good for you. Our ability to survive when food isn't adequate would also be a demonstration of our resilience. So in an environment where you need to go to a food bank, as an example, to get food, you would probably want to have a good understanding of how to choose a hamper that would be relatively good for you and your family. And in an environment where you don't have lots and lots of money, you would probably want to know how to stretch your dollar so that you could continue to feed your family and provide nutritious food for them on a budget. So being food resilient means that you're able to make do when circumstances are difficult, and that you think about and work towards ensuring that when there isn't enough food, that your family and that your community are able to sustain a livelihood. What could Toronto be doing in terms of emergency response to food and food access? I think I think the feeling for many years was that we need to work as a society to eliminate food banks in our communities, and if we were to improve on poverty and get everybody out of poverty, then there wouldn't be a need for people to use food banks. I think that's changed, and unfortunately and fortunately, food banks are here, and they've become a part of the everyday life in the community. I think what we need to do differently is, and we could learn from food banks in terms of how we begin to provide opportunities for food that is dignified, in a way that's dignified and continues to be of good service for individuals that need food. I think we need to invite food banks to the table when we talk about community hubs, community organizations, when we're talking about community development. What can we do for each other? What are the best practices that community centers have, communities have, food banks have, so that we can all start to talk together as one, so that we can continue to ensure that we're providing a dignified opportunity for food in our community. In terms of food and the fact that cities only have about 3 days of food on hand, I mean, I think it's crazy to think that crisis won't happen. I mean, it's not if, it's basically when there'll be crisis and when our cities begin to run out of food, and what is our plan? How are we resilient in terms of crisis, and how do we ensure that our neighborhoods actually have food? And Scadding Court has been having discussions about this now for a number of months, and we're revisiting the old idea of root cellars, and having root cellars as part of our community dynamic, having them all over the city of Toronto. I think when you begin to explain root cellar and the programming associated with root cellars to the community and get them engaged, get them involved, they'll understand the purpose of them, and why they become valuable. So during the time when we're not in crisis, we can use the root cellars as food distribution sites. We can do canning and preserving, still be an educational opportunity. But when there is crisis, the community will come together, and they will have access to food that's being saved specifically for that situation. So it's two things we need to do. One is, we need to build education and build community cohesion around this concept that we keep our cellars full, so that when the day comes that we need them, they're there for all of us together. And we need to actually start to develop the root cellars. We need to build one, demonstrate it, and hopefully they catch on in the city of Toronto, and we can actually have a process that we believe will keep us going for more than just 3 days when the crisis happens.
The way I see it is that the city has a lot of knowledge about resiliency and what they want to do, but the problem is that on the ground level, communities lack access to the funding and training to start their own sort of initiatives that can increase food access and make their communities more resilient. I think the city of Toronto could do a better job at making available knowledge, training, opportunities for people to do that sort of thing and build their own networks. Resiliency starts from the community itself, and if the community can't be resilient on its own, then it's always going to be reliant on something else. So obviously community-driven urban agriculture programs and similar style offerings would be a good start. Things like seasonal cooking programs, cooperative gardening, greenhouses, things where people hubs of activity where people can gather and actually become more self-reliant. That way they're not sort of beholden to the larger food system where things are shipped from far distances, and most of our food is coming from non-local producers. Beyond that, knowing how to actually sustain yourselves in the event of a catastrophe during non-growing seasons through, say, food preservation techniques or the like would be very important. And what's needed for that is obviously hubs in communities. So Scadding Court Community Centre and other community centres in and around the city are important simply because they sit at the core of a community. It's a place where people from all walks of life come together, come into contact, work with each other, and have the opportunity to know each other. It's a place where you can build a network, where you can share knowledge, where you can build skills and organize, essentially. As I see it, I think Scadding Court does a really good job of doing this. Maybe I'm a little biased, but we offer a number of programs and services and opportunities for people to get engaged with each other, with organizing, with building skills, and that's the first step to creating resiliency. Community centers in and around the city have to offer a platform for people to come, organize, and become self-sufficient.